Thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm very happy to present you today. My report is slow, data modeling and report design basics. I'm very thankful for the opportunity New Stars of Data is giving me, and thankful for the support which I got from Katrin Bochart and some initial feedback to get this thing started. My name is Alexander Korn, and I'm going to get you through the presentation today. Before I start the presentation, short intro about me. I'm currently employed as full-time employee for Microsoft as a Power BI support engineer responsible with a focus on Power BI report server, SQL Server reporting services, and paginated reports. But I'm very proud and happy that I will be starting at Heiko Group. Heiko Group is an IT consultancy which focuses on helping companies make better decisions based on their data. To do that, they also are not only a software developer, not only an IT BI consultancy, but also develop TrueChart. TrueChart is a visualization tool which helps those companies to make better decisions and is available for Qlik, Sense, and Power BI. As a side note, I'm also having a blog called actionablereporting.com. So that's a place where I write in any stuff which comes to my mind with focus on actionable reporting. So let's get the presentation started. The first part is how you optimize your data model. The second part is reporting best practices, how you can apply those. And as a third step, how you can optimize your report design. I have for all three parts some demo after the presentation. So data models, why are those important? In each stage of data models, reporting data models matter. As a model designer, you have it much easier if you have the best practices for data modeling because you're faster and more efficient integration process. But also as report designer, you can use the data model much better and much quicker with the report design. And last, there are the report consumers, which obviously benefit of better report as a whole. But we're talking today about performance. So performance is the biggest driver for any data models are the biggest driver for any performance issues. So yeah, if you're looking at performance and how to improve, make sure to spend the most time on your data model and how you can tune the performance there. One super cool article for data model best practices, to be more precise for tabular model best practices. So whenever you're working with Power BI, that's the best practices which should be applied. So Michael Kowalski has a great blog and article about that, and a majority of my best practices come from him. I've also an own article about this, but make sure to read those. Sorry for the bullet points, but I want to make sure to have the top 10 list here. So first one is have only needed columns and tables. So this helps not only the performance, but also the readability of your data model. So make sure to reduce those, and it will help during the refresh and also the performance rendering your report. Second, with this comes only a clean star schema, so not a snowflake schema, not a flat table, because of two reasons, obviously performance, but also readability again. And there are sometimes cases where data models have multiple date columns, but my recommendation is here not to go with multiple time dimension tables. Instead, just go with one time dimension. And you can make use of the duck statement, use relationship to enable and activate your different date columns within certain measures. That's a little bit extra work during the setup of the data model, but it's much cleaner and much better if you just stick to one time dimension. One clean star schema also means no BiDi. bidirectional filtering, no too many relationship. Instead, you can use cross-filtering with if. Also calculated columns. So I know it's convenient to do the calculation in Power BI and to have DAX calculated columns there or even tables. That's a quick process, but you should try to have your transformation at one place. That's a database. That's where you have all your transformation, and calculated columns have to be calculated on the fly when you refresh the whole thing, and when you process, when you actually render and work with the report as well. So make sure to have them in a database. That's most often faster. One place for transformation means also the limit of Power Query. So transformation, once again, push them as far back to the database as this is possible. There's certain DAX function which you also can pay attention to. So some might be time consuming on performance as well. For example, the /, there's the word divide. That's the same DAX function, but is faster. So that's an easy one. But there's also search if error contains intersect filter, which you should try to avoid. Table prefix. That's also cool. There's a style guide for your tabular model, also by Michael Kowalski. So go there and make sure to read that as well. But one important part is that word the table prefix in your DAX measures are not for measure names. That's how you can differentiate calculated columns from measures. Calculated columns should be per se already in the database. But nevertheless, if you have those, then you can use the table prefix. But otherwise, you can already identify measures if they don't have the table prefix, the name of the table in the measure name. So that's an important part. I think super important is our calculation groups. They are super great way how you can limit and reduce your measures because there's certain combination. For example, if you have multiple time variances, multiple currencies, that will blow up your data model, and that's something you should definitely try to avoid. I've got also a blog post where there's a template for a time intelligence calculation group. So you just can copy paste the time intelligence calculation group into your data model, and that then immediately reduces your measures quite a lot. And those time intelligence is super important because obviously every data model has time intelligence and time dimension, but also those deviations to previous year is also something everybody's keen on. An additional way to limit measures is through visual field parameters. Earlier, calculation groups were only possible with Tabular Editor, but nowadays this is also possible with the new Power BI desktop. Add a last refresh on the top right. I think that's easy to understand. And for Power BI specific, use empty measure tables plus display folders plus detailed row expressions. Detailed row expressions is something which you define, and then if you use your data models in Excel, that's something, your Power BI data models in Excel, that's where you need to pay attention to detailed row expressions, because otherwise the drill through, if you double click the number in the pivot table, doesn't work. So far, so good. How can you troubleshoot data model performance? You always can start with your PBIX file, and through DAX Studio, you can make use of the Vertipack analyzer. But much more important is if you connect with Tabular Editor to your Power BI file or connect directly to the BIM file, because there is a best practice analyzer, which we're going to look at later. I'm stopping here. If there's any questions, I think that's a lot already. I'm not through the presentation yet, but are there any questions yet?
There are not many questions, but lots and lots of different feedback to the points you've been making, and lots of clapping and thumbs up to the points you've made so far.
Cool, perfect. I'm gonna now go to report design best practices. That's something how you can improve your performance as well. Why is that important for improving your performance to have report design best practices? In my opinion, that's maybe the most important part, because does it really make sense to visualize things which don't generate an action afterwards or any insights afterwards? I don't think there is a big benefit of improving a visual a second or maybe even a half a second performance-wise if in the end the end user is not really getting anything out of it. So that's why I keep this also under performance and put a big point of it. The report design best practice, which is most complete and most known is IBCS, International Business Communication Standards, and TrueChart is following those. So the picture I'm showing here is one example of this. It consists of success guidelines, success and the acronym, and I'm going to talk you through success in a second, and later on also show one example. So the first part is conceptual rules, and that consists of say. So convey your message first. Say what you want to, what insight you have based on the report which you generated, and once you have a message, then you can structure your message afterwards. You can structure your content based on the message you had before. Once you have the concept done, then you can go to the visualization part, the things you see, the perceptual way, and the third point then is express. That's super important. That's always a point for discussion. Choosing the correct visualization for your purpose. If you want to super oversimplify the whole thing, there's only two types of visualization. There's one for time and there's one for categories. And time is horizontal and categories is only vertical. So vertical, horizontal for time means either line or column chart, and categories means either a bar chart or tables. That covers the majority of your use cases. There's special visualization for certain purposes and for certain messages. Maybe I'm not going to say that out loud very much, but maybe even a pie chart at a certain point might be beneficial if this message is very, very simple. But obviously, there's a very biggest majority better visualizations than a pie chart, for sure. Once you have the right visualization, then you can go to simplify, be as simple as possible. So avoid any noise. And if you are simple and have reduced everything, then you can increase the information density. You can condense your space. You can make use of the space you just want and simplify. And that's super key. For example, in a music sheet, that's also a notation standard. And there's lots of information on a music sheet, and the composer puts everything on there, and nobody's going to say this is too complicated. You just need to read each part, and then a great piece of music is created. And the same applies for condense for our business information. So you can put lots of information on one sheet. You just need to be clear and simple and need to have only the most important part. If you have more visuals on your slide, then for sure you need to check the scaling. You need to ensure that you're not lying to your audience and that one bar might be much higher than the other one, or that the scaling is not correct. All of this should be done in a unified manner. You should, before you even start, should have a notation standard, and you should try to apply this notation standard. And then if you go through all the 6 points above, if you apply that right, that's all in your Unify. If you want to know more about this, there's an IBCS standard, or ping me on LinkedIn for sure on this, on all the information later on. That's possible too. So that's my second part, speed up report performance. So you have now your data model set up. you have the right visualization and your report actually makes sense to look at, that's where you can now focus on report design, impacting your rendering speed. So what can you do to improve the performance? Before you improve and check the performance on your visualization, always start on a blank page on Power BI desktop, because and then save the blank page and then reopen the report. Why do you need to do that? Why do you need to open that on a blank page? Because data can be cached and cleared in DAX Studio, but visual cache can only be cleared by closing and reopening the report. So troubleshooting report and DAX performance. There's the PBIX file, PBIT file, and that you can analyze with DAX Studio. And there's the performance analyzer JSON. That's super crucial. And you actually can also analyze that in DAX Studio or in the report analyzer. And we're going to have a look at this in a second. Cool. So far, so good for the presentation. What about questions? All good?
All good so far. People have been continuing to add information, but not adding questions as such.
Adding information is super helpful. For sure, there's lots of info additional, which is more on the report performance. So I'm happy, first of all, to learn and for the supplementals and additional info. That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm gonna start with a report. Normally I should start on a blank page for sure. That's what we just said. And I'm gonna talk you through the example regarding reporting best practices. That's not the focus on reporting best practices. Here I'm more focusing on the performance side for the data model and the report design. So, but if you're more interested about that topic, feel free to hit me up and we continue to talk. So let's start with a maybe not so great example. You already see it takes some seconds, even though the data model is super small. And what do we have on this page? Maybe let's go first with the selection pane, and we see there's lots of stuff going on, and there's also the performance analyzer, which is always my starting point for any performance troubleshooting. So I'm gonna click on refresh visual and see how fast all the page needs to render, and I see here duration in milliseconds, so almost 2 seconds it took to render this visuals, and there's lots of shapes which also take some time. If you go deeper, and then we can see, okay, the DAX query super fast, but others is big. Other is always waiting for other visuals to render. So if others is big, that always means, okay, you have way too many visuals on one page. If you want to now analyze maybe even the DAX query, maybe you don't have thousands of visuals on your page, then you can also investigate the DAX query. How do you do that? You can copy the query, go to your DAX Studio, either by directly opening DAX Studio, or there's obviously also external tools where you then can jump into DAX Studio. And then there you can, for example, connect also to your local Power BI desktop instance, and then you can also right-click order quantity and define your measure and everything. So that's one way to start. But you also can save, export your performance analyzer set, and then load performance analyzer data. And then you have all the info which is just saved here, and then you can double click and you get the definition of the DAX statement, which took so long, and can investigate that further. To investigate, you need to enable the server timings, and then you can see, for example, in which query storage the whole thing goes. If we go back to the Power BI desktop file, maybe there's even a worse example. If you have scrollable pages, that's definitely something which you should also try to avoid. And then let's try to have it a little bit better. If there's any questions, feel free to interrupt me.
All good so far. I will jump in if needed.
Perfect. Instead of having all those visuals, let's clear again and let's refresh the whole thing. And you see the same page which we had before with lots of visuals is now just 4 visuals. So we have a title, which includes the other elements. We don't have anymore those different shapes. Questionable if we need those grid lines here either way. And so you reduced all those visuals to the minimum. Okay, cool. We were at DAX Studio already, so there's also the Vertepic analyzer. So that's great to investigate your whole data model as a whole. And you can see various things. You can even see the definition of measures if you use the Vertepic analyzer in Excel. So if you don't know anything about that, feel free to go to SQL BI, and there's a guideline and everything on the Vertepic analyzer. So I use it also as documentation tool to document all my measures and a data model in a whole. But you also can see where is the biggest size and the biggest columns, and how you can improve and tune your model based on the Vertepic analyzer. Once you have saved the Power BI desktop file as performance analyzer file JSON, and you have the Power BI template, you can also go to the report analyzer. That's a place where you can investigate your report design and how you design your report and see what are issues on that. The easiest way how to do that, before I go into that, you see the same chart we had before, the one with the many visuals, and you see the shapes here in between. So that's the same, but just without visualization, and you can define the border. So for example, you only want to see the visuals which take longer than 7.5 and 5 seconds, or which take longer than 0 seconds. And then you can even double click the metadata of that visual and then paste it into DAX Studio as well. And then you can even define your DAX query here. And format your DAX query, so you can then go back from your report analyzer back to your DAX Studio and investigate the DAX query. There's also a best practice helper, so you can see few recommendations. And for example, we see at one page there's a top N being used, or there's filters used, or we have for sure tall pages with vertical scrolling. One page we had, which I showed before. So those best practices here are either you remember those and directly already apply those, or you afterwards check your report with the report analyzer. And then you can double click and it will directly already go to the violation. But we said before, the most important part to tune your report, your performance, is in the data model. And the best place how you do it is you go into your Tabular editor. I'm using Tabular, the free open source, the free version 2. And you also can directly open a Tabular editor or go via the external tools. So that's probably the most important tool for me, or which I believe is super important for data modeling. And there, crucial is also a best practice analyzer, which is here. If you click down at the bottom, there's also an article about it, how you can actually set the whole thing up. But there's many violations. You either can right click and directly apply the fix, even for some, generate fix, or even directly apply fix. For example, format string for date column could be fixed, and there's many other things. You can also ignore some of those, because not always in all cases you need to change your data model. But for example, we even have a snowflake architecture here. So that's definitely something to avoid. Cool. I think that's it from Tabular and best practices. I have one bonus demo which I would like to show. So we have now improving report design. We have now improving data model design. And there's one example how what IBCS also consists of. It's a lot more like we have seen here, but I want to put a focus on a multi-tier chart. I choose a column chart, but multi-tier bar charts also exist. So first, always message we set. For example, sales in December is down. I'm using here a message report, but there's also a message for dashboards. They usually don't have a message like do that or this, but it has a purpose, and the purpose then is the message. So all reports and all dashboards have this message part. For example, the message and the purpose of a sales dashboard is to investigate your sales and how you can increase your sales. So actually the investigation part here is then more the message and the purpose. If you have a message, then you can also have a title, and that's always the same way. It's the company, who or what is investigated. Then first who, then what. In this case, it's sales in 1,000 euros, and then what time is investigated. Once you have the title set up, you decide for a chart type. We see it's time, so we have a horizontal axis, for example, October till December. And then as the next part, you have the actual data. And if it's time, you always obviously have sometimes forecast data, but for sure previous year data as well. And maybe sometimes even plan data. PL for plan, PY for previous year, FC for forecast. And that's the normal, or that's maybe even already more than the normal chart we're having. But now I think comes a super crucial part about the reporting best practices, which are in IBCS, is to show deviations. The other day I had someone telling me, I don't know if costs in this case, for example, personal cost is positive or negative. In my opinion, normally you know for the purpose and the business case if it's positive or negative, if you need to highlight it green or red. But if that's really not the case, then you can omit here the color, for example, have then a blue standard color in your notation standards to say, okay, I don't know if personal costs are not perceived as positive or negative, so I don't color it red or green. But I think there's only rare cases where you don't know if it's positive or negative, the deviation. And if you have then additional tiers on top, make sure the scaling also matches, and you can even increase even more the information density with relative deviations. I have your plan, but you can even go further. You can even have now the previous year multi-tier on the top, or you can have the whole visual for either business unit. And that's how you then increase the information density. This, I don't think it's needed to have that big of a chart. You could have the same chart on a very small space and then have many more months, or maybe even other business units or other content, or maybe even an explanation for revenue based on sales and or whatever the driver for your revenue in the end or result is. And then an important part, we have here a message. That's not always here, but highlighting here goes a lot. So if you highlight certain elements, then even though your message might not already be on the top, it's already clear. Hey, I'm focusing here on a 19% deviation for December forecast. That's it for my side. I have here a small demo of TrueChart. So that's how we apply also IBCS in at Heiko Group. Thanks a lot for all the attention, and I'm here now for any questions you might have. Even if you don't have questions right now, I would be super happy to be pinged by LinkedIn or get a comment on here, or there's always the survey, so I'm gonna look at that in detail. I was happy to present. Thank you so much.